I don't know of anything. All right. Well, we're ready for Genesis chapter 24. We'll finish that up and go on into 25. Abraham has sent his servant to, actually he sent servant and then others went with him to find a wife for Isaac. They have found Rebekah, if you recall what we studied last week. They have found her, and they are going to pry her away from her family and get her back to Isaac. And so that's where we are. Genesis 24, verse 52, we begin right there. And it came to pass when Abraham's servant heard words that he worshipped the Lord, bowing himself to the earth. The servant brought out jewelry of silver, jewelry of gold, and clothing, and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave precious things to her brother and to her mother. And he and the men who were with him ate and drank and stayed all night. Then they arose in the morning, and he said, "Send me away to my master." Well, this is it's a pretty straightforward story, but it kind of gives you some insight into what was done from a standpoint of custom at that point in time. The male would give the female family some money, maybe some cattle or something in order to, you hate to use the word purchase, but sort of as a payment, as a dowry, kind of. Then it worked reverse later on, but in biblical times, the man would give money, would give things to the lady or to the female's, the bride's family, in order for her to come and be with the family, the in-laws, her in-laws, so to speak. And it says, but her brother and mother, when the servant asked, send me home, the brother and mother said, let the young woman stay for us a few days, at least 10, that she may go, and after that she may go. Why 10 days? Well, it's more of what's called an idiomatic expression. In other words, it's just let her stay for a week or so. That's about what we'd say. Let her stay for a few days. Let her stay for a week or so, and then she can go. Which, when you stop and think about it, you think, well, that's a reasonable request. Let us have our time. Let us have our opportunity to say goodbye to her before we send her off. Because one of the things that we have to think about, and one of the things when you get to lining up everything, is that the trip to where Isaac is about 900 miles. And by camel, remember that the servant came with camels, brought camels, and came on camels, that if a camel travels about 25, can travel up to 60 miles a day, but usually travels about 25 miles a day. If you walked, the walking distance in biblical times was considered 20 miles a day. But you're talking about 2 months travel. That's traveling every day. And so she's not just going across the street or across town. And so it seems to be a reasonable request. But it's interesting, and note the fact that, think about, okay, if they're 2 months away, then he has traveled at least 2 months. And seemingly from the story, and we didn't really cover this last week, at least it reads to me like he's been there for a little while when he finds Rebekah. He hadn't been there for just arrived and now he's ready to go back. But notice that the servant said to them, don't hinder me. Since the Lord has prospered my way, send me away so that I may go to my master. The servant has an urge or an urgency about the situation, wants to get back home. So they said, we'll call the young woman and ask her personally. And then they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? She said, I'll go. So they sent away Rebekah, their sister and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men, and they blessed Rebekah and said to her, Our sister, may you become the mother of thousands, of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gates of those who hate them. In a lot of ways, prophetic. Did they know exactly about Abraham and what all she was getting into by going to be Isaac's wife? Well, probably so. But they said, well, hopefully you'll be fertile. But now remember, let's note this. I don't think we've really talked a lot about this. In biblical times, if a woman did not have a child, she was considered not to be blessed by God. So let's look at it positively. If she did not have a child, she was not blessed. So if she had a child, that was a blessing from God, and she was blessed. And so in biblical times, in Old Testament times especially, women that did not have children were looked upon as cursed for whatever reason. And glad we don't have that today. Glad we don't have that feeling, but that was what they had in that day. And so, to have a lot of children, be really blessed. And so this is the blessing, if you will, that her family blesses Rebekah with. Rebekah, verse 61, her maids arose, and they rode on the camels and followed the man. So the servant took Rebekah and departed. Now Isaac came from the way of Beer Lahai Roy, for he dwelt in the south. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field in the evening. He lifted his eyes, and there the camels were coming. Now Isaac probably every evening would go out and spend some time maybe soaking up a little of the breeze and a little of the air of the evening, and go out to meditate and give thought in the field. And one day he lifts his eyes, one evening he lifts his eyes, and here comes the servants back. Rebekah lifted her eyes, verse 64. When she saw Isaac, she dismounted from her camel, for she said to the servant, "Who is this man walking in the field to meet us?" And the servant said, "It's my master." So she took a veil and covered herself. Let's talk about a few things there. She'd been on a long trip. All of a sudden, she looks up. She sees somebody. Out of respect, she gets up and she gets off of her camel. Respect. That's a thing that is completely different. I'm not saying things that are done today are disrespectful in comparison to our day, but used to, if you walked in and let's say somebody was sitting at a table or sitting at a desk and you walk in, out of respect, what would they do? Stand up. Today, if you get them to lift their head and say, "Hey, you're doing well, right?" We could look at things have changed. When I was a kid growing up, you wore a ball cap. Where'd you wear it? Outside. Where do you wear one now? Anywhere you want to. Things have changed. Times changed. I walked into, about 3 years ago now, I walked into a preacher's office to meet him. And as I walked in to meet him, he sat at his desk. He continued to sit at his desk. He never asked me to sit down. And I left after about 5 minutes. I thought, I've had enough. Had enough. Now, contrast that with, I went to see a preacher about a year ago, and I was by the church building. It was at Bellevue. It was actually the young man there. And I went to meet him, and he stood up. He greeted me. He stood up, and we talked. He offered me a seat, but I was in a hurry, so I couldn't. And so I left. But difference in people. But the respect that Rebekah has, she gets off her camel, and that's just a sign of respect. But then it says, that, and think about, she had been traveling those 900 miles, that it says, the last part of verse 65, so she took a veil, she covered herself, she wrapped herself. The cover here, excuse me, is really a sign of personal modesty. It's the covering of the head and the face. And it's not that she was coming without any clothes on. It's just that she covered her head, she covered her face. And the servant told Isaac, verse 65, all things that he had done. So they sat down, probably. Sat down, and the servant said everything that had gone on, how that, as we talked about it last week, how that they'd figured out who he would get and how he'd gone to the well. He found Rebekah, and she took care of of the camels and took care of him. And so it was a good fit. It was just like everything had worked out like they had planned. And so Isaac then, verse 67, brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. And he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Isaac took her into his mother's tent. I've always just thought that was an interesting phenomenon. I didn't take Suzanne home to meet my mother. We grew up together, Suzanne and I did. And so she knew my mother and father. But you go home and you go home to meet mom and dad. I remember Ethan bringing Kara to see us. He warned us. There was nothing really to warn us about, but he told us a few things. And I think he told his mama what she kind of liked to eat. And so, we tried to make a favorable impression upon her at first. And now she's just old family, and she just comes on in, plops down. And that's the way we want it. That's the way we like it. But difference when you first meet them. Well, Isaac takes Rebekah in, sees mom, and then, of course, basically what the text is telling us is Sarah passes away. And Isaac... Yeah, the text reads is sort of ambivalent as far as when she does pass away. We really 100% don't know for sure. But it seems as if, from what we studied 3 weeks ago, that she'd passed away already. And so if that be true, then this might be another idiomatic expression for where she was buried. And it just depends on how you look at it and the timing of all things. And we don't have all that nailed down 100%. Anything else? Good question. Good comment. Pretty straightforward story. Well, we'll get into a little bit now. Abraham is going to pass away. Abraham has really done one of the major things that he wanted to do towards the end of his life. Abraham has gotten old, but Sarah dies, and Abraham seems to have a newfound potency about him. He had said in Genesis 17 that he was dead from a physical standpoint, but according to chapter 25, verse 1, after Sarah passes away, he finds a wife. Her name is Keturah, which is interesting because her name means the perfumed one. Maybe she sold incense. I don't know. We don't really know. But it's kind of interesting, her name. Maybe this is one of those things you probably wish wasn't in your head, but maybe she stunk, and that was her name, to cover up for, they didn't call her Stinky. Who knows? But Keturah, my mind's messed up. It's a problem. And so anyway, she bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Medina, Ishbak, and Shua. And Jokshan begot Sheba and Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were Asherim, Nethisim, and Lemuman. Now, how would you like a name like that? Suzanne came home from school every year. It seemed like there was always one child that had an interesting name. How'd you like to have those names? I did find interesting, and I really didn't know this till the other day. If you notice the last three, Asherim, Tushim, and Luminum, the I am at the end of the Hebrew literally means people of. And so this was probably not just a person, but groups here is being referred to. I did not know that, or if I did, I had long since forgotten it. And so it's the plural and probably means people of. It's people of, or father of people. Yeah. And so Abraham, verse 5, gave all that he had to Isaac, even though he had all of these children. So he had more than Abraham, but Isaac, but he gave all that he had to Isaac, and which is kind of interesting. He settles his estate before he passes away, which is, I'm going to step in it. It's always a good idea. If you've got an estate, we have the one child and don't have to worry about it. And if we had two, we still wouldn't have to worry about it. but he sells his estate before he passes away, which is a good thing. When my mama, my mother's mother, passed away. Now my papa had passed away long before, but my mama left a very small will. You have to understand she had 6 children at the time. 4 of them were still alive when she passed away. And there was a house. There was very little. There was a house and a few little things. But the first thing in the will, this is what it said. Above all things, do not fight over all of this. And it wasn't, like I say, it wasn't that much. It was a house and just a few little things that were really left. And so Abraham, though, settles his estate. He gives it all to Isaac. But Abraham gave gifts to the sons of the concubines, which Abraham had. And while he was still living, he sent them eastward, away from Isaac, his son, to the country of the east. So he's trying to help Isaac out. And Isaac, through whom, of course, the seed would continue. And then he says in verse 7, this is the sum of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. So Abraham lived a good life. It is characteristic or interesting, if you will, verse 8, when he dies, look what it says of Abraham. He lived to be a good old age. And we know that because verse 7 says he lived to be 175 years old. But he lived to be an old man, and he's full of years. Now, here's just a thought. What do you want said about you when you pass away? Have you ever thought about it? I have, because I guess I have, because I've preached, I don't know, a lot of funerals. Let's just put it like that, a lot of funerals. And you always try to find something nice to say about somebody. I was not at this funeral, but my dentist at the time told me about a funeral that he attended, that the preacher was an acquaintance of his and a good friend of mine, and he was an older gentleman. Anyway, a person that died that was pretty much a scoundrel. And my dentist was, like I say, relating me the story. This scoundrel was a high school friend of my dentist. And so my dentist, when I went in for a regular checkup, he's talking, he said, I saw Brother Brown the other day, and said, Brother Brown preached so-and-so's funeral. I said, yeah, I'd heard that he was supposed to. And he said, you know what he said? And I said, no. He said, he got up and he called the old boy's name, and he said, he wasn't the nicest, he wasn't the most pleasant, he wasn't the most moral, and he went through a lot of things. And he says, but we take all of that and we wrap that in the cloak of God's mercy and God's grace and leave it to God. Well, that's a nice way of saying, okay, as when you preach somebody's funeral, you try to find something that's nice, something that's good, and say something about those qualities, those characteristics, if you know the person. Now, if you don't, it's really hard, and so you just pretty much preach a sermon. But when you think about what could have been said about Abraham, and really was not, well, he lived a good long life. That's pretty much what it says. Now, you could say, well, but doesn't good old age, doesn't that, that seems to modify his age more than his life. But it reminds us, and really, or should remind us, should give us pause to think about, what are they going to say? What's the epitaph on my gravestone going to say? What's the preacher going to say? Now, you might say, well, I don't care. I'm long gone, not going to hear it. I got you. But how is my family going to be comforted by the preacher? Or, and it doesn't have to be a preacher that preaches your funeral, whoever speaks at your service. How's the family going to be comforted by the thoughts that are going to be directed for 15 or 20 minutes at my passing? Actually, Missy said it was going to be shorter than that. It's going to be, thank goodness. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But that's right. Yeah, the high contract. Yeah, I told you I was sick. That's right. There's a lot of good ones out there, isn't there? Yes, yes. And but it is something to think about. It is something to think about at all. And so it says, verse 9, and his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which was before Mamre in the field of Ephron, and the son of Zoar the Hittite, the field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth. There Abraham was buried, and Sarah his wife. And it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt in Beer Lahai Roi. This is interesting because Abraham, was not buried really with his people. Abraham was buried a far piece from his people. But he died and was buried like he should have been. And you might say, well, it says, but he was gathered to his people. Well, he just went to the place where departed spirits go. And so he died, and that's the whole point. And so Abraham passes away, and this is pretty much the end of Abraham's story as we see it in Genesis. Is there anything else? Yes, I thought so too. And I've always thought so too through the years. But yeah, I just think it's interesting. Somehow, somewhere, Ishmael and Isaac seemingly make peace, at least for a little while. It's not true always, but anything else? Good point. Well, let's skip verses 12 through 18. It's more genealogies, and it just makes me embarrassed to show you that I can't pronounce all those names. But they are folks. That this is the genealogy of Ishmael, and Ishmael was a fighting man. He was a man of war. His people, his descendants, yeah, even still today, people of war. And so that's pretty much the story on Ishmael. We then began verse 19. This is the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begat Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah his wife conceived. Barrenness was a problem, right? We've already talked about that. But Sarah and Rebekah and Rachel seem to have been barren for a period of time. Prayer was made now by Isaac in verse 21. It says Isaac pleaded with the Lord. He prayed, and the Lord granted his plea. The Lord heard him. The Lord said, okay, and Rebekah then conceived, but the children struggled together within her. And she said, if all is well, why am I like this? So she went to inquire of the Lord. That's the question. If all is well, why am I struggling? Why is there? Well, there's more than one in there. And so the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples shall be separated from your body. 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Most definitely prophetic. Who's oldest, Esau or Jacob? Esau is the oldest, but how do we refer to them? Jacob and Esau. Backwards, which is really a no-no. In biblical times, you always named your oldest and then your youngest. Like it would be, my sister's name is Carol. You really wouldn't mention her because she's a girl, but But if you were to take the same premise of today, it would be Carol and Paul. We will see, and we know the story, but we will see why we refer to them as Jacob and Esau instead of Esau and Jacob, even though Esau is the oldest. And like I say, we know the story, but we're going to look at it again. And so we have Esau and Jacob being prophesied, if you will, about before they're ever born. The Lord told her, said, you're going to have two nations come up out of you, but one's going to be stronger than the other. The older one, though, is going to serve the younger instead of the way it usually was and seen. And so when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed, there were twins in her womb, and the first came out red. The word red, the Hebrew word, Edom, or Edom. He was like a hairy garment all over, so they called his name Esau. Esau just simply means hairy. Afterward, his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. The word Jacob means one who takes the heel. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. And if Isaac is 60 years old, and we follow the text from the previous 2 weeks, that means it's been 20 years of marriage since they, or from the time that they got married to the time that they had these children. So the boys grew. Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field. Jacob was a mild man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Mild man. We think of mild in a lot of different terms. The word mild just simply means he's kind of quiet. He's a complete man, but he's kind of quiet. He's one who he's really a good moral person, but you don't see him out in front much. And so Jacob was considered the mild man. Esau, though, was the hunter. Esau killed game, fixed it, and Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game. But Rebekah loved Jacob. Those of you that are blessed with more than one child, let me encourage you, do not show favorites. I've had to deal with a lot of folks as adults that had problems because mama loved the other one more than they loved them. And don't show favorites to your grandchildren. If you got more than one, love them all. Be thankful for all of them. Be appreciative for all of them. Treat them all the same. That's the one thing I have always said with regards to my mother and father, that mom and dad treated Carol and I equal. Neither one received more than the other. We didn't get more at Christmas. One get more at Christmas than the other. We didn't get more growing up. I think I've shared with you the only thing I got more of than Carol did, and that was whippings. I did. I got more than Carol did. And when I confronted my mother with that after Dad died, she said, "We'll just look at you." Yes, ma'am. I was the kid that couldn't sit still in church, and I was the kid that I pushed Mother to the edge. And but at the same time too, we were both treated equally, and I appreciate that. And so here, this is sad to say that Isaac loved Esau, and yet Rebekah loved Jacob. But that's what happened. Anything else before we finish the chapter? Yeah, we're going to be able to finish. So Jacob cooked a stew. Lentils, pretty much, bean stew, if you will. Esau came in from the field. He was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please feed me with the same red stew, for I'm weary." Therefore, he his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright." Now, biblical times, the older one always got a double portion. And so Jacob, the youngest, said, "Okay, you hungry? Tell me what you got. Sell me your birthright. For your birthright, I'll give you." Basically, I had an old college roommate that preached a sermon once that was entitled "All for a Bowl of Soup," and he preached it based upon this text. And that's a pretty good thought. I'm so hungry. Okay, well, you've come in from things, and you've heard the expression, "I'm so hungry I could eat a bear." Now, I could eat. Well, Jacob says, "Okay, sell me your birthright." And Esau said, "Look, I'm about to die. So what's birthright to me?" Now you wonder, you don't know, but just how famished was he? He thought he was so famished that he was about to die. Jacob said, "Swear to me as of this day." And so he swore to him. He sold his birthright to Jacob. Jacob gave Esau bread and a stew of lentils. Then he ate and drank, arose, and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Well, when you think about, and you say, "Okay, Esau, what'd you sell?" When you think about what he sold, you say, "Well, he just sold his birthright." Well, no, he really sold his family. He sold his family's fortune. He sold his hope. Those that would come after him of his line, he sold that. He sold really what was his, and he really made what was his priceless, and claiming that it really had no price. Just a bowl of soup. That's interesting. It's pretty strong when you think about it. Here's what he sold. He sold his birthright. What are some things we can learn from this? Well, let's pick out some lessons that we might be able to learn from this text. How about the fact that we need to evaluate the important? You might say, "Well, preacher, it's pretty important that you eat. If you're hungry, you got to eat. And if you're famished, you got to eat." And he was famished enough he thought he was going to die. Yeah, I've been to that point. It wasn't true, but thought I was going to die. It's sort of like Ethan was little, and we were looking for a congregation at the time, and it was Christmas time, and money was short, and Suzanne and I had decided that as we came through Nashville, we were actually trying out at a place up north of here. And so we decided that we'd stop at Opryland, the hotel there, and we would go through it. And that would be, for Susanna and I, that would be our Christmas. And we explained to Ethan, now we're going to go in and we're going to see all these pretties. He was little, I don't remember how old. And we're going to see these pretties, and that's it. And so we got in there and we were seeing the pretties. And this is probably when you could buy a canned Coke for 50 cents. And Opryland, being Opryland, was $2. And we were determined, because we had told him beforehand, he wasn't going to get that. And he was determined to show us that he was. He won. He got the $2 canned drink. And, of course, now, I guess I haven't been to Opryland to look to see in the last few years, but I'm sure a canned drink's probably about $10. So, inflation. And I don't know that. Don't quote me. Don't quote me on that. Oh, clear cup with ice in it. I had forgotten about the clear cup with ice in it. But Ethan just thought he had to have that drink. He pulled another stunt like that pretty much at Walmart one time on his mother, and as they were exiting, I was with you. We were exiting that night, and we were sitting out in Walmart. Had a little vestibule like this was in Waverly, and We had told him, you're not getting anything when we go in. We walked out, and whatever it was he thought he just had to have, and we were sitting in the vestibule trying to get him calm so we could get him in the car. And we were also trying to calm ourselves down as well. And one sweet member of the church, grandmother, walks in. Now, what's going on? Oh, well, we just had a little disagreement, a little flare up. And she said, let me have him for a little while. Suzanne and I sat in the little airlock of Walmart, knowing what was fixing to happen. Sure enough, she walks out with him in about 5 minutes. She's bought him what he wanted. She says, now, he needs this. He wants this. But he has assured me that he will not throw another fit in Walmart again. I don't know that he did or didn't. You'd have to ask Suzanne. But but sometimes we think we need something when we don't. And so Esau thought he needed something when maybe he really didn't, and maybe it would have been best to evaluate the situation. What am I giving away? What am I selling? How about another lesson? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. 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 Well, go ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah. 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 I was hoping you'd talk longer because I want to look up this passage to make sure I'm in the right place. Okay, it's not exactly where I'm looking, but if I'm not mistaken, it's in Romans chapter 11. Paul makes a statement from God. Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. And the word hated does not mean the same. It's the word love less. But I think it makes Jay's point. And I think you're right. By the way, yes. Anything, I got 2-3 more lessons to learn. But first of all, evaluate what's important. How about second of all, don't let the immediate overtake the important. That's what we do a lot of times, right? Whatever is right in front of us overtakes what is important. And so we become folks that are consumed with the idea of just the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. How about don't be short-sighted? I think in many ways we could say, well, Esau, he was pretty short-sighted and all that. He didn't take the long view, he took the short view. And so many times that's what we do. Okay, this will get me through today. That's all I've got to be concerned with. Well, admittedly, we could look at Matthew 6 and say, well, okay, that's what it says, Take no thought for tomorrow will take thought for itself. Sufficient is the days, the evil thereof. But yet at the same point in time, too, if we don't take a long view, if we don't take a long view of life, if we don't take a long view spiritually, we're constantly just putting out fires, but we're not moving on. And so don't be short-sighted is a good lesson to learn from this. How about learn what's valuable? Don't give up your blessings for too little. Don't give up your blessings for what seems to be maybe good at the time, but really is too little. And I think that's one of Esau's problems. He gave up his blessings for really just something that, think about, go back to verse 28. Esau had game, just like what Ken said. Probably came in with some. And so he gave up He gave up his blessings. He gave up his blessings of his birthright for just a bowl of soup. Bowl of soup. Now, I like soup. Suzanne and I was talking yesterday. We had peas and green beans and cornbread and meat and we had a really good supper. We always have good meals. Don't get me wrong. Suzanne's a really good cook, and I really enjoy and appreciate her cooking. And the reason I don't cook is because we die. But Suzanne's a really good cook, and we had a really good meal. And she fixed cornbread. We had we had January the 1st food, and so we were talking about we had a little cornbread left, and we'd been talking about for a day or two that she's going to cook some chili this week, and she makes excellent chili. And so she said, well, we'll just save the rest of the cornbread and we'll have that in chili. Sounds good, especially since it's supposed to be cold this week. Which, isn't it interesting how things change? It got so warm this past week, my grass grew. Honestly, my grass turned green and grew. And of course, I hope it gets bitten, because I looked out yesterday and I thought, I really need to mow, but I'm not going to. In January, y'all think I'm crazy. And so, but sometimes that little bowl of soup seems so good. And so many times we give up our blessings for what seems to be good now. And we need to be careful that we don't give up what we have with God for something that just seems good now, but in the short-sightedness of it, it's just that, it's short-sighted. And so the lesson really that we learn from this story with regards to Jacob and Esau is that Esau sold too cheap what was a great blessing when he should have looked a little bit deeper and a little bit longer. Anything else? All right. Well, let's go on into the 26th chapter then. We'll start there. We won't get very far. Isaac and Abimelech. There was a famine in the land, besides in the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar. And the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land of which I tell you. Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I give all these lands. And I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. And I will make your descendants multiply as the stars of heaven. I will give to your descendants all these lands, and in your seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. A couple of things to note there that are interesting. First of all, notice that the Lord appears and gives great confirmation, gives direction and gives confirmation, tells him where to go and where not to go, gives him direction. But he also then gives him confirmation. He says, look what I'm going to do. I'm going to bless you. Sort of a, if you will, a secondary promise to the promise that he made to Abraham. Abraham, through your seed, all nations of the earth will be blessed. Abraham had more children, of course, than Ishmael and Isaac, as we just saw. But nevertheless, Isaac was the preferred one by Abraham, because God had pretty much told him that way. Now God comes to Isaac and he says, okay, look, this is the promise that I made to Abraham through you. This is the way it's going to come. And he says, but notice verse 5, because Abraham obeyed my voice, kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Because Abraham listened to what I told him to do, and Abraham did exactly as I told him to do. Therein lies the story for us. If we listen to God, not only us, but others are blessed. Our children are blessed. Our community is blessed. Our society is blessed. And so, Isaac dwelt in Gerar, verse 6, and the men of the place asked about his wife, and he said, she's my sister, for he was afraid to say she's my wife, because he thought, lest the men of the place kill me for Rebekah, because she's beautiful to behold. Sound familiar? Yeah. Sins of the father. Like father, like son. You find that a lot in the Bible. You find it true in life as well, don't you? It reminds us of what we should do. I jokingly told my son back when they were here a week or so ago, and then they stopped by here just this week, stopped by to leave the grand dog for a couple of days, and then they came by to pick him up on their way back home. And my son hovers over his little daughter. He goes every step that he's home, every step she takes, he takes. And I said, you thought I was bad, Bubba. You worse than I ever was. Our children pick up on us. And then my sweet, loving daughter-in-law looked at me and she says, he gets more like you every day. And my wife looked at her and said, I'm sorry. But we need to remember that. And like I say, sins of the father come about. So it came to pass that when they had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked through a window and saw, and there was Isaac showing endearment to Rebekah, his wife. When Abimelech called Isaac and said, quite obviously, she's your wife, so that you say, she is my sister. And so you see this idea of, it says it shows, the New King James uses the word showing endearment. It's the idea of caressing her. So there's more to it. And Abimelech said, and Isaac said to him, because I said, lest I die on her account. He said, this is why I told you this. Well, full circle. And so Abimelech is going to send him away, and we're going to talk about this next week. Anything else? This is a good place to end, really, right there. Yes. Poor Abimelech gets beaten out. He loses out. He didn't learn his lesson either. So. It would have been everything. Yeah, that's the way I take it. Yes. Yeah, he sold it. Yeah. Yeah. The way I take it is he sold it, he sold everything. He became, just as the prophecy had said, he became the servant to his brother. There's nothing. That's exactly right. Yeah, that's the point. That. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, he sold it. He didn't barter. What he sold it for was not the lesser half. He sold it for the bowl of soup. So don't. Maybe there's a lesson. Don't go to. Yeah. Don't go in and order soup this week. No. Anything else? All good. Anything else? Well, there's where we'll start. Let's bow right quick for prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for this day. We're thankful for the blessing of it. Thankful for the opportunity to study your word, to learn really to be patient and let your will come about, but also to be very careful to not be short-sighted, but to look long past as we should in the future with regards especially to our soul and salvation of it. We ask that you be with us as we go into this period of worship, that we'll worship you in spirit and truth. Watch over us, bless us, and keep us, and hold us as we hold to you. For this is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Have a great week.